with that announcement out of the way, as I said yesterday, we started discussing the nature of digital ethics. You see here an overview of what topics digital ethics covers, the ethics of data, of algorithms and AI, software, and of practices, whatever involves the data, the algorithms, and so forth. That could be business strategies or say political decisions. All this from, as I mentioned yesterday, an ecological approach, meaning not so much that we care about the environment, not in that sense, but in the sense that we are looking at all these areas as a part of a single environment. So the attempt is to avoid focusing only on, let's say, the ethics of AI, as if the ethics of data was not terribly relevant and fundamental in order to understand what we do and what's right and wrong with what we do when we use AI. So nothing particularly profound, just a way of stressing the fact that it is a whole environment that we need to discuss. Remember, it is also an environment within which we spend increasingly more and more amount of our time. The own life experience, the hyperhistorical time, the infosphere, things that we covered yesterday. Now, with that out of the way, still yesterday, I summarized the distinction between can, may, and should. This is a bit of a sort of an undergraduate moment, but I thought it was important to make sure that we understand each other. We need to be very careful in using these three bold words. They mean something different. Can refers to what is doable, feasible, may to what is allowed or not allowed, should to what ought to happen or not to happen, ethically speaking. During the Q&A, we also discussed a little bit the difference between accountability, responsibility, liability, and what it means to be tolerant while not being relativistic. More on this topic, some reminder about what we covered yesterday. If you remember, there was a diagram where I showed that soft ethics, which is the ethics that we practice once we accept that the law is okay, has this two features. Happens after the acceptance of the law. So it looks at what can not only what can and ought to be done of and above the law, but it's also the kind of ethics that is presupposing hard ethics. Now, this is a distinction that is important, so let me stress it once again. Hard ethics is the ethics that normally we learn in life and in a university course. Is the one that disregards whatever the law says, not because it's against the law, but because it doesn't care about what the law says. It simply says, look, this is right and wrong, independently of whether the law approves it or doesn't approve it, allows it or doesn't allow it. That sort of hard ethics is crucial, but it's not what we are concerned with during this course. Here, for reasons that will become, I hope, clearer later, we are concerned mostly with soft ethics. The sort of ethics that accepts that the law is okay or okay-ish, is sufficiently good, doesn't need to be reshaped, objected to, rejected, but builds on top of the law, and therefore is what we said before, post compliance. Now here, and I hope you see my arrow here, the cursor here, it means that it's
Luciano?
Yep.
You're not sharing the slides.
Fantastic. Thank you for anyone pointing this out. Now I am. And you should be seeing it behind you. Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Thank you. And apologies. Let me go back one step. This is the slides that I showed you yesterday, so not too much harm done. But this was the distinction that we introduced yesterday, soft and hard ethics. And this is, again, a reminder between, a reminder about the two features that this soft ethics has. Feasibility first, which is shared by any ethical discourse, something needs to be doable for something to be subject to ethical analysis. And compliance first. That's the real difference between hard ethics and soft ethics. We assume that the compliance with accepting, following the rules of the game, namely the legal framework in their country, in their region, is okay. Now, clearly, this is problematic. Now, if you are in the EU, it might sound like a no-brainer. But if you are in other countries, China is the usual suspect here, compliance first may not be exactly what you want to recommend everybody. Now, it might be a matter of marketing or business strategy. The number of times we heard the big digital actors saying, look, this is the law of the country, so I comply with the law of the country, is endless. At some point, Facebook said so, Apple said so, Google said so. Now, we may or may not like that, but if they do what they are saying, they are approaching the rules of the game there in terms of soft ethics. Now, I'm not recommending that. It's a conceptual distinction. It needs to be handled carefully. There are contexts in which that conceptual distinction is perfectly fine, others in which that conceptual distinction is not. Now, if you were, for example, a matter of discussing freedom of speech, for example, I would not, say in Hong Kong, I would not recommend a soft ethics approach, unless all you want to do is live a peaceful life. The soft ethic approach has this further extra features. It makes explicit and clear that whatever project we're talking about was developed not in order to bypass regulations, but say pretending to go down the road of self-regulation. And it's not even an attempt to address or try to shape lobby-wise current legislation. It really is a way of building on top of the legislation that is already available. Now, I say this because sometimes people seems to confuse, shall we say, soft ethics for self-regulation, or just another attempt, say, by companies not to comply with the law, try to make their own rules, etc. Not what we have here. I tell you once more, then I'll stop. Is accepting and complying with the law, and then try to do more or less than the law allows us to do. The things that are getting, and almost at the end of all these written bits of text, they get slightly more complicated. Once you have a post-compliance approach, you recognize that the legislation doesn't cover everything, and it shouldn't. And of course, companies can leverage digital ethics in order to assess and decide what data uses and algorithm process in two cases. As I show you in the diagram yesterday, when legislation provides no simple, straightforward answer, so you just don't know what to do, and competing values and interests need to be balanced. More on this when we will discuss the trade-off logic, or when legislation does not provide an answer, and there's much more than one can do of and above what legislation strictly requires. Now, all this should by now be obvious. Let me give you a couple of examples now, concrete, and we'll spend 5 minutes on this. So if you need a coffee and you don't care about the example, this is a good time to go and get that coffee. So there are different ways of understanding ethical analysis, and I will show you in a moment, a few slides from now, probably in about 10 or 15 minutes, the main ways in which we do ethics, at least philosophically speaking. Usually what we understand is something value-driven, good and evil, do and don'ts, ought and ought not. In this context, I put that in gray because what we, for this particular example, may want to focus on is the value of intangible. In a particular company or organization, it could be an NGO, it could be a government agency. It's about what's right or wrong with that particular organization or body according to people who interact or belong to that body. Privacy, trust, reputation, responsibility are just some examples. Now, these, of course, are classics. What happens in that context when we discuss the value-driven analysis of an organization from that perspective? Here, example. Data are slightly outdated. I didn't find anything more recent than 2020. That analysis happens every now and then. It's a classic analysis. Ocean Tomo does that for the whole S&P 500 companies. Those are the top companies in the United States and internationally. And it looks at the intangible asset of those companies. It's like asking, how much is Apple worth in terms of intangible? Things that are not cash in the bank account, computers in the office, buildings, cars, etc. Remember that S&P is about 75% of the American equity market. So it's really representative of, say, American capitalism. Now, I'll leave that slides there for a moment to ask a question. You don't need to answer, of course, but just to focus your attention. So if you take Apple or Microsoft or Facebook or Amazon or any of the big companies in the American market, how much do you think is worth their company in terms of intangible asset? Stuff that you cannot touch and is not representative by, say, cash flow, etc. Now, normally, I get wrong answers because the answer is staggering. If you look at this diagram, which was produced, as I said, in 2020, by 2020, so a couple of years ago, or more or less, most companies of the ones that we are very familiar with, Apple, since today is Apple Day, so to speak, given the new metaverse product, their value is 90% totally intangible. That refers to what is called goodwill, technically speaking, is how much customers trust and like a company, is their logo, the Coca-Cola moment, is their patents and their know-how, is the human resources that they have in terms of skills, abilities, and so on. All that makes 90% of the value of a company. When Elon Musk bought Twitter, he didn't create Twitter from scratch for a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the price he paid, for obvious reasons, if you see at this diagram, because 90% of the value of Twitter is not a piece of software and the ability to send short messages across the internet. That would be any kid game. Is 90%, and probably more in the case of Twitter, the name, the fact that everybody's on board, the number of people actually connected there and they're not going to move anywhere else, etc. The fact that the Pope has an account on Twitter and so has the influencer. All that is the real value, and that's what you pay. Not the piece of software, not the buildings or the cash flow, etc. Now, once you have that clear in mind, you understand why the soft values are also what determine, not only financially, but also in terms of internal ethics and therefore loyalty, for example, of employees, the market as well. Now, this again is 2020, so it's slightly dated and is also partly influenced by COVID, the pandemic. But if you look at it once again at the American market, we focus on the American market because the market we know better is, believe it or not, the more transparent in terms of how much data we have on their market. Other markets may be morally or ethically preferable, but we don't have the data on those markets. there was a 20% turnover in the United States, and 3 out of 4 people leave their jobs voluntarily. Why? Why anyone leaves a particular company? Well, remember, these are we're putting together a few sort of points, and then we need to cut them through a line. Soft ethics, this the intangible value of a company, including the culture of that company, the name of that company, the value that people working for that company find in working for that company. Am I proud to work for company X, Y, and Z, etc.? And the data about how many people leave, come and go. Well, the cost is enormous. Is calculating to around $630 billion of turnover. So when people say, why should a company, why should I do soft ethics? Why should I apply any soft ethics? After all, no, I just follow the rules. I am compliant. Well, you can point out that if you don't have a decent soft ethics internally to the company, that cost is enormous in terms of turnover. Are your people, your employers, happy or proud to work for that company? 33% of an employee's annual salary is the cost of replacing the people who actually resign. Why do they go? Mostly for ethically related reasons. Now you know what I mean by ethically related, not because someone has been killing someone else or because people steal, but for those soft values, for that soft ethics that it is there or it's not. 35%, of course, get better compensation and benefits, but all the others, work-life balance, 25%, does not recognize them, 16%. Better corporate culture, 8%, and it keeps going. So ultimately, next slide, the work-life balance is why people stay. So let me show you the slide before. These are why they leave, and this is why, when asked why they stay. 23% work-life balance, 21 recognition, only 19 compensation, another 19 working relationship and management. So put together those numbers, and the vast majority of people who leave a company or any employment does so for soft ethics related reasons. Now, this is normally my pitch if we were talking to a CEO and the CEO were to tell you, look, I don't have time to waste. I'm a businessman. I'm the devil's advocate. Why should I be doing? Who cares? Well, if you don't want to do it for ethical reasons, because it's the right thing to do, at least do it for business reasons, because it's the economically intelligent thing to do. A company with the right soft ethics internally not only is doing the right thing, as we will see for the rest of the course, but it's also economically business wise. You keep your best people and you attract more of the best. There are therefore at least two advantages here for soft ethics. One is the risk management and the other an opportunity strategy. Remember, soft ethics is what enables you to do more, better, alternatively, once you've done the compliance. To put it slightly differently, you make your legal unit within your department happy. They don't want to see any risks run. They are compliant. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2, what else can we do? Do we need to do anything else? Well, I just gave you an example among many others. If you don't do anything else, people may still leave because compliance is not good enough. They may leave for another company that is doing it better, more intelligently, for example, has a sustainability program in place, ESG, etc. So all that means that you can manage your risks more intelligently, but you can also grab more opportunities. So end of the pitch, so to speak, and end of the little example, a moment of summary. All we have seen yesterday and today are a few concepts, a bit of a framework. The suggestion that endoscopes away hyperhistory, infosphere, on life, etc. The suggestion that modernity is coming to an end and has a lot of tensions within it. People have been saying this for a long time. In this particular context, is the pressure on that particular withdrawal of humanity into itself. The age of the I should come to an end, and if it doesn't, we will be running into real trouble, environmentally and spiritually. I remind everybody here that I'm not a religious person, so I'm just talking about what I see as facts rather than beliefs. Because of that, there is an ongoing sort of digital revolution. It's transforming foundationally a lot of the issues we deal with. For the rest of the discussion yesterday and today, we started looking at some methodological issues. The concept that I wanted to introduce yesterday and today was this distinction between, among many others, soft and hard ethics. I just gave you an example of why soft ethics matters, even if people care not at all about doing the right thing for its own sake. Now, we leave that behind because we need to move through a long list, as you can see from this slide, of other methodological points. From what perspective are we approaching all this? In what way can we do soft ethics? Can we understand and shape the digital revolution more intelligently? To understand that, here is another piece of methodological tools. We're building our little bag, and we need to have this extra bit with us. We need to be familiar with some terminology, and we need to understand a little bit better how we go about analyzing anything. So soft ethics is going to help us to understand. From now on, I'll probably drop the soft. So ethics in general, digital ethics, is going to help us to understand and shape what we are going to call a system. That could be a company, that could be a family, that could be me and my life. That could be the entire planet. It could be a democracy. It could be the European Union. Whatever we are analyzing, from now on, we could call it a system. That particular system, remember, we want to improve, shape, understand, etc. that particular system. We do that for a purpose. This is fundamental, and unless people keep in mind that any analysis is done for a reason, you will, and we will get lost. I'll show you in a moment what that means very carefully. But no question is ever asked without a purpose in mind. If I ask you, what did you have for breakfast this morning? I might have something in mind why I'm asking it. So back to us, we analyze a system for a particular reason. We do that at a level of abstraction. Now, I'm going to spend a few slides on this concept. They're coming. It is crucial, like the distinction between soft and hard ethics, to keep in mind that any understanding, any analysis, whether ethical or not, of anything in the world, whether there is a black hole as a system or my life, was a successful, say, launch of a product, the system, or a new piece of legislation by the European Union, whatever we are analyzing called the system, the object of analysis, always happens for a reason, the purpose, at a specific level of abstraction. Now, for the time being, and I'll come back to this, so don't worry about it. Let's assume that level of abstraction is just an interface. It's an interface that shows something of a system and doesn't show something of a system. It enables us to choose what we want to see or analyze of that system. Now, a level of abstraction will generate a model of that system. It will provide a certain kind of description of that particular piece of legislation. Imagine we want to analyze the AI Act. We do that for a reason. What's the reason? We want to understand how the AI Act is addressing the concept of risk. The level of abstraction, therefore, will concentrate on the AI Act as a system to extract from their system a particular model. The model will be how the AI Act handles the concept of risk. Their model will identify within the system features of the system that belong to the system. So at this point, what we have is what we would call, in any other context, a theory. We have an apple, the fruit, that's the system. We want to analyze it at a particular level of abstraction for a purpose, understanding why does it fell on my head. So we abstract anything. We don't care that it's an apple, an orange. It could be anything. Why a body level abstraction is always falls on the ground when left alone. That will generate a particular model with identified structure, and the structure will be some Newtonian physics understanding of that system. We can do this again and again in a variety of ways. Warning, what I just show you here is my best attempt to make sense of terminology that floats around and is not always consistently deployed. Some people will use system and model interchangeably. It's a bit weird, but it happens. They will not use the terminology of level abstraction, which comes from computer science and a particular branch of computer science called formal methods in computer science. They will speak about interface, or unfortunately in sociology, a lot of lens, a terminology that I particularly dislike because it's both vague and pretentious. But you have plenty of people talking, especially in my department, of lens adopted in order to understand the system from a particular perspective. That's another terminology from level abstraction. Now we want to be clear and precise, so we adopt the LOA terminology, but all the others are pretty much having a family resemblance with that concept. Suppose you, I hope not, I discourage all my students from using it, but suppose you are in love with the terminology of lens. Well, you adopt that lens for a particular reason. Maybe you want to adopt a, say, human right lens for the purpose of criticizing the system in question, which could be, say, the metaverse or a platform. You get the gist. Now you get a model, a structure, etc., etc. So what this means is that there's a lot of representing and designing here. Now, to use Greek words, so we don't generate much confusion. If you look at, let me go back in this slide. If you look at this slide, most of our traditional epistemology or theory of knowledge or philosophy of science, in fact, most of our culture as well, looks at this, and what it sees is a representation. For example, you are an old Greek philosopher, you look at the stars, the system, and for a particular purpose, a level of abstraction, etc., you build a model which identifies the structure of that system. The system is given, in other words. So this theory, quote unquote, is a representation of something that you find in the universe. It could be, as I said, a black hole, the stars, it could be a society, it could be a particular economic strategy, it could be a government, etc. So most of our philosophical understanding of modeling comes from a mimetic approach. Mimesis, Greek representation. It means that we take for granted that there's something in the world and we want to understand it. Now, slowly through time, especially at the end of modernity, in the last, shall we say, century or so, we have moved a bit quietly, gently, from mimesis to poiesis. Poiesis, again, Greek, means making, not representing. I'll show you much better and in more details what that means, but for the time being, just let me stress this point. Instead of assuming that a system is in the world and you need to describe the world for what it is, you actually build the system. Imagine comparing the following disciplines from a, say, university perspectives. On the one side, you have mimetic disciplines: biology, chemistry, physics, the classics. Now, if you pick up a philosophy of science textbook, they will be talking either of science in general or of these disciplines, philosophy of physics, philosophy of biology, etc. What are the other disciplines? These are disciplines that normally, at least in the past, were supposed to analyze something in the world. Life, biology, how the world is made up of chemical components, or the forces and physics of this universe. So chemistry, biology, physics, etc. Neuroscience, for example, is an attempt to understand something given, the brain. What's the alternative? Well, consider in the same sort of perspectives from the university, disciplines like architecture, computer science, law. These are all disciplines or economics, not only study the object, but they build the object. We are in the faculty of law, so that comes as a natural example. Jurisprudence is not just the theory of legal systems found in the world, but it's actually an attempt to build, improve, criticize, transform those systems. Architecture doesn't even simply represent a history of buildings, but it's also obviously an attempt to teach people how to change them, transform them, restore them, etc. Computer science, and we come to the next slide, doesn't describe, so the digital doesn't describe the world, but it doesn't even tell you how the world should be, not prescribe. It actually adds to the world. It builds part of the world. Not for today, but hopefully I will be able to show you in another lecture, the next one, when we are going to talk about digital ontology, what exactly this means. For now, we need to keep this in mind and remember the following distinction. There are disciplines that describe the world and disciplines that build the world. Now, of course, as we move through the history of epistemology and history of human knowledge of what is around us and about ourselves, we have shifted increasingly from the mimetic, representative approach to a more constructive, poietic approach. Today, even the classics, now physics, biology, chemistry, are increasingly poietic. You can't do physics without having the CERN building the experiments on which then you run potential tests of theoretical frameworks. Biochemistry is also an attempt to understand better materials that or combinations of biochemical components that can lead to different entities, different systems. So even the classics are increasingly pushed towards a more interventionist, constructionist, poietic approach. Now, footnote. Let's not confuse this with some French-oriented anti-realism, which tells you that we live in a socially constructed world and therefore nothing is real, everything is a social construct. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that increasingly, as we live in a world that is transformed, affected, built by humanity, it's less and less obvious that what we do is merely describing something in front of our eyes, so to speak, and more the case that we are actually first building something and then putting that something into the world. The infosphere, remember, is increasingly something that is humanity built, with a former terminology that we should not use anymore, man-made or woman-made, made by us. There's a long story about this, which I want to scratch only for those of you who are interested in the history of philosophy. This debate between representing something out there, discovery, or building it, inventing something, has been with us since Plato onwards, at least. The debate in Plato between techne, the construction of things, and episteme, the representation, the understanding of things, went, if you like, well, shall we say, not exactly in the best way for techne. From Plato onwards, we abandoned the view that knowing something is to be able to build that something, is the tradition known as the knower's knowledge, the knowledge tradition in epistemology. And what we have from Plato onwards is the supremacy of the representative time, when knowing something is being able to make a picture, a photograph, a representation, an idea, eidos, the visual counterpart of the object. Now, that long tradition is challenged more and more from modernity onwards, from the scientific revolution onwards, because science, Galileo onwards, is about building the models that you can then study. Building means controlling the variables, knowing exactly what's in it and what is not in it, and therefore being able to predict what that model will generate. This is, in 2 minutes, something very sketchy, and I hope to come back to this in the following lectures, but we need to keep this in mind in the background to understand that computer science belongs to the disciplines like economics, political science, jurisprudence, architecture. They are not merely only studying the subject, they build it. Now, with that building means that you need to understand not only how to analyze it at what level of abstraction, but also what mechanism you can put in place so that you can build the world in a way that is in line with your ethics. Quick summary before we move to the next. Distinction, hard ethics, soft ethics, we now have it. Another distinction between poietic and mimetic. Our epistemology can be both, but is increasingly poietic. Means a lot of responsibility. This is one of the misalignment we find in modernity. Remember, we quickly covered the loss of centrality in the modern age. We're not at the center of the universe, animal kingdom, mental life, we're not at the center of the infosphere. That lack of centrality in modernity is also parallel by a withdrawal of humanity into itself. The age of the I is also the age of displacement. It's a bit like saying, look, okay, I'm not at the center of anything, but I can be happy with myself. It's, forgive me, a bit of a light touch comment. It's a bit of sour grapes. I'm not at the center of their game. I don't care about their game. I'm not at the center of the universe. Who cares about the universe? I'm not the center of the animal kingdom and the biological life. Okay, who cares about it, etc. Now, as we've been retreating and giving up on centralities, instead of learning the lesson, we have given up on that particular game we are no longer interested in. The only game we are interested in at the end of these 4 revolutions is ourselves. The I cares about the I. We are only caring about ourselves. Now, that's not exactly the best outcome, but in that process, the misalignment, as I told you, is the following. There's something incredibly good in modernity, which is the Cartesian ability to assume responsibility. If you read the Meditations again, you will see that Descartes, and we're picking up Descartes because it's an easy reference, but the beginning of the modern age is the assumption of responsibility. Kant will repeat this when he will answer the question, what is enlightenment? The enlightenment is the exit of humanity from a sense of slavery, being subject to other forces, lack of absolute responsibility, both for its actions and its knowledge. Now, from Descartes to Kant, the assumption of epistemological responsibility, it is so because we are the only ones who can justify that it is so and such and such. There is no Bible who says so, there is no special guru who says so. We just trust ourselves. But that sense of, or the acquisition of epistemological responsibility is the counterpart of the loss of centrality of those 4 steps. And that's the misalignment. And then we move on now to the next step. That misalignment, remember, hard ethics, soft ethics, poiesis and mimesis. There's this component of, on the one hand, having more and more responsibility because we are the only ones who can take responsibility for our actions and our knowledge, on the one hand, and at the same time, lack of centrality. We are not at the center of anything, but we are the only game on town. Now, you can tell how this generates friction. If you are the only game on town, you can also do whatever you want. I mean, the assumption of responsibility is also a discharge of responsibility towards anything else or anyone else. There are no gods, there is no nature towards which we are accountable. We are accountable only to ourselves, humanity accountable to humanity. This tension will re-emerge in the following lectures. We can keep it in mind. The next step is understanding better what it means to design something. Back to the distinction between representing the world or building it. If you're building it, you need to know how to build it. The distinction here is between a description and a prescription of what ought to be the case. Now, the difference, you know that, so I'm just repeating something that you're well acquainted with. The difference between a sociological, anthropological, ethnographic understanding of human behavior and ethical one is that in one case we're just there to understand and describe. We're not there to tell people what to do or not to do. A legal, ethical, or normative understanding is there to tell people what ought to happen or ought to be the case, what ought to be the behavior in question. So the fundamental distinction between the purely descriptive and the normative is that in one case, we just take into account what is the case, and we try to do a decent job in being objective, in not say over imposing our values, etc. In the other case, it's almost the opposite. We want to have a normative analysis which tells us what is right and wrong, and what ought to happen and ought not to happen. How do we do that? Now, this should not worry anybody. It's super simple, and I'll spend 2 minutes describing it, and you will see it really is a elementary analysis of how to design an ethical system. For the computer scientist in the group, or anyone who's done some data science, you will have immediately recognized the two different ways of describing the same object. The one above with the A's and the S is a description in sort of alphanumeric description of the graphic description of the picture below. Both in different ways describe something that we have met a million times, at least in my case. Imagine the doors of a supermarket. That is called a memoryless system. Is more or less computational, is a transition system and does only one thing. When you break the light between the two cells, opens the door. Once you have moved and the light is intact again from cell to cell, from sender to receiver, the door closes. It doesn't remember anything. It doesn't have any memory of what happens. It just acts on input. Input, so signal interrupted, outcome, door opens. Input, signal restored, output, door closes. On and off, on and off. And if you are not a kid like me, still in your 58, you still play with the door of the supermarket. My wife tends to take me away. Stop playing with the doors to the supermarket. But back to us. If you are marveling at the mechanism and you say, oh, wow, this is a memory transition system. Look, now if I walk, it opens the door. And if I stop, I move away, it closes the door. This is the simplest sort of example of what you have in front of your eyes. Now, let me, out of the example, give you sort of a walkthrough of the specific example in this case. In this case, I made the example slightly more complex. Instead of having only two S for state, open, close door, we have four. Suppose that the door can be totally open, totally closed, open one half or open 1/3. As simple as that. Why we don't want to do that? It will be a little bit crazy, but suppose someone has decided that, say, to save air or keep the building warm, you can just completely shut the door, completely open it, or open it partially, half or 1/3. How do I move between totally open, totally closed, 1/3, 1/2? Well, in the diagram above, you can see the 4 states, S1, and hopefully you can see also my cursor here, S1, S2, S3, S4. These are the 4 states in which the system can be. Totally closed, partially open, even more open, totally open, for example. That's the door. These are the actions you can take. Suppose you can take 3 actions. You can walk towards the door, walk away from the door, or be in the middle, right there, where the door is, for example. What happens if you take one action, action A or B or C, and the system is completely closed? Suppose I walk toward the system goes towards S2. It moves from S1 to S2. It partially opens. What happens next if I do A again, and by now I'm in S2? Well, it goes to S3. It opens even more. You get the gist. So these are more, in a more abstract way, the system states. And they could be endless. I mean, it could be, so endless, no, because it's there will be a mistake in programming. There could be thousands of system states. I give you 4 here just to have a bit of granularity, but it could be only 2, at least 2. A system with only 1 state, it would be a stupid system. That's like a stone. But it could be, a huge number of states. You can take a huge number of actions. In this case, I gave you just 3 to add some complexity. Forgive me. And whenever you are in a particular state and take a particular action, you move into another state. Now, how does it look graphically? Suppose we are in S2 and we take action A. We move from S2 to S3. Now we are in S3. What happens if we do A again? We move back to S2. We can design this. If you don't like it, say, no, I don't like it. Whenever I do A, I want to move to the next state. Well, this is the wrong schema. You need to change the schema. Suppose we are in S1 and we do A. We move from S1 to S2. We're now in S2. If we do A again, well, we move to S3. We do A again, we go back. We don't like it. We're in S2. We want to move to S4, where you have to do A again. And then you have to do C in order to move to S4. You want to stay here, where you need to do A, and you stay here. Action A and action B will keep you in S4. You like where you are, and you keep doing exactly A and B to stay here. You do C, oops, you go all the way back. Now, I hope this is clear enough. We might spend a bit of time in the Q&A. Trust me, this is chapter 1 on any textbook on computation. This memoryless transition systems is what you can start programming by writing this particular table. Why it is crucial? Because it's the most elementary mechanism I can think of in terms of a system that moves between A, B, and C, etc., and components of that system, rules of that system. This is what we need by going back to the top picture. You have agents, people, sources, biological entities. It could be an artificial agent, it could be a company, it could be a bureaucracy, anything that is the source of an action. And you have states of a particular system that are modified by the actions implemented by agents. In that context, where can we work? Where can we put pressure to make sure that, for example, we move from S1 to S4? Suppose that S1 is the state of a particular society, and we don't like it. S2 is a little bit better, S3 is even better, but ideally we would like to be in a society that looks like S4. How do we move from S1 to S4? You can work on the agents, you can work on the actions, or you can work on the system states in terms of understanding what's right and wrong. Here's another analogy, and I hope that will help. You can work on the cook, you can work on the cooking, or you can work on the dish. Unpacking the analogy. What is right and what is wrong? Well, in order to understand, remember soft ethics and digital ethics, etc., we really need to work on the agents. That's a particular position, and it would be called in the history of ethics, virtue ethics. It doesn't matter what actions or system states you're talking about. If the agents are virtuous, anything else will follow. The right kind of agents are the right kind of answer to how to get from S1 to S4. If you think that this is a little too abstract, there are colleagues who these days they will support in the ethics of artificial agents or AI the following two positions. One, you need to develop a virtue ethics approach and make sure that those who build those systems are doing that for the right sort of virtues behind. Or they could tell you that we can implement in the agents the right virtues. These are agents, we can design the agents, we put in those agents by design the right kind of virtues that will make them morally good, morally right. The agents we want to have in the world, to make sure that therefore we live in S4, we don't live in S1. So looking at the history of ethics, you can have a virtue ethics perspective that works primarily, if not uniquely, on the nature of the agents. Back to our metaphor, what matters is making sure that you get the right cook. Then the cooking and the dish will be fine. This virtue ethics perspective is what you find in Greek and Christian philosophy. It's not about so much the actions, but the source of the action that we need to be concentrating. The virtues are what will ensure that you go to paradise or to hell, because you are that kind of person, not that kind of other person. You can be forgiven. You can say, sorry, I didn't mean to do action A, B, and C. I didn't even know that I was doing action A, B, and C, etc. I was doing this for the right reasons. I'm the right kind of agent, etc. Virtue ethics, in fact, is mostly studied in ancient philosophy, developed in ancient philosophy, Greek philosophy, and in Christian philosophy. You care about the agent. When it comes to modernity, our topic for this year, we actually have developed new approaches to ethical analysis, how to move from S1 to S4. We have been concentrating enormously on actions. The two major theories here are consequentialism. Utilitarianism is one branch, shall we say, of consequentialism. The right kind of action is the action that generates that maximizes the benefits for the largest number of people. You see, it doesn't matter whether I'm a good cook or not. It's the recipe, it's what I do that matters. I could be doing that for the most evil reasons. I could be the most unreliable, unpleasant cook in the world. But if my cooking generates the maximum amount of pleasure and benefits for humanity, who cares about the agent? What we care is about the actions and their ability to maximize benefits. Or, and that's the other alternative, but still focusing on actions, it doesn't matter who the agent is or for what reasons the agent is operating in one way or another, but from Kant onwards, the ontology, we assess the actions in terms of their rational nature? Are they universalizable, for example? Is this action an action that would be taken no matter who the source is, because it's the right action to have? Are they generated by interest, by calculation, or because they are relying on the fact that they never treat any human being just as a means, but always just as an end? Well, again, I don't care about the source of the action. I care about the nature of the actions. So either because I'm concentrating on consequentialist reasons, what is the effect of these actions, or because I'm concentrating on the nature of these actions, are they rational, universalizable, do they respect the means ends sort of imperative? This is what matters. In other words, forget about the cook, it's the cooking that really makes a difference, S1 to S4. More recently, and then again, I hope to study this more, remember, modernity is cracking under its own weight. It's not accidental that we're not concentrating in modernity about the virtues, because the virtues require a measurement of those virtues, and that measurement is provided by the other, either nature or God. It's only nature and God that can tell us this is the right way of growing up a human being. Especially in Greek philosophy, you find plenty of analogies between the virtuous individual and the healthy plant, for example. And likewise, in Christian philosophy, you find plenty of analogies between what is the virtuous individual and what God appreciates as the right way of being a good human being. You lose those kind of external parameters, and all you have is humanity measuring itself, either purely rationally in terms of formal nature of those actions, universalizable, means ends, etc., or in terms of effects of our actions. But there's no one else out there who's going to tell us, yes, this is right, this is wrong. It's just us judging about ourselves. Now, that system has been cracking a little bit, as I told you, because, of course, the other keeps pushing back. We haven't managed to eliminate the other completely, no matter how much we speak about the death of God and the dying of nature. And so, not very surprisingly, if you follow this particular way of looking at things, recent, and I mean not decades old, not centuries old, approaches to ethics have been concentrating on the well-being, the nature of the system in question. Remember when we introduced system, model, etc., No, we're all there. The system in question, suppose, is a particular urban environment, or it could be an ecological system. With the analogy of the cook, the cooking, and the dish, I don't care about the cook. I don't care about the cooking. If the dish is good, it's good. No matter what recipe the cook, and could be the most evil cook, followed, and what mistakes were made by following that particular recipe. So I don't care about the agent. I don't care about the actions. What I do care is that the system is in good health. Something happens that is good for the system, is hetero-oriented. The question at this point is no longer who should I be, the agent, what action I should take, but rather what is good for the receiver of my actions. So the usual thing, don't ask what Uncle Tom and what does the government, what the US, what society can do for you, but ask what you can do for them, etc. Well, that line is pretty much here. Now, if you look at the history of ethics, that is where we've been sort of moving recently. Medical ethics, business ethics, anything that is environmental or bioethics, they are all ethics of the receiver of the action, not of the source. This is the source. This is the action, and this is the receiver. Is it good for the receiver of this action? Well, if it is, then I don't care what the action is or what the agent is. It's good for the environment. Let me give you a concrete example. The whole market that tries to put incentives and disincentives on global warming by exchanging, for example, tokens of any kind, or ways in which you can compensate for your carbon footprint, etc. Well, we're actually leveraging, nudging rational agents who, for their own convenience, maybe they get more money, maybe they get more miles, maybe whatever, like selfish reason, they do actions that we don't really mind so much, but they're good for the system. So when you hear market-oriented solutions, market-oriented solutions say to global warming, they start from the system states and say, look, we really want to be in S4. What is going to bring the whole society to S4? And they'll start talking about, agents being virtuous, actions being universalizable and good benefit, etc. What is going to push the agents and the actions in such a way that the system is going to benefit and we are all living in S4? This is just an example and it's not a justification or an endorsement, mind, but it's a way of looking at the ethical discourse from a very different perspective. You don't ask about who should I be, what should I do, why should I do it? The three classic questions in any sort of introduction to ethics. Who should I be? Virtual ethics. What should I do? My actions. And why should I do it? Now, the pushing, what is going to force me or convince me to do X, Y, and Z? You're rather not even concentrating on the nature of the actions. Are these actions maximizing utility, maximizing benefit? Are they universalizable? Are they based on the means never always end treatment of humanity? You're actually concentrating on what is good for the patient, for my client, for the environment, for society, for their family, for those people landing on the shores of Italy. Now, all this, as you can tell, pushes the ethical discourse towards the receiver of the action, is no longer concentrating entirely on the agent who is at the center of the action. Now, with this out of the way, a comment, and then we move on to designing all this. The four revolutions. The four revolutions have moved the agent outside the centrality of the action. When we adopt a virtual ethics approach to digital ethics, for example, in terms of designing artificial systems, we're still trying to keep modernity alive. We're still trying to think and engage with our actions in such a way that we are at the center of the action. Virtual ethics, therefore, and I have had long debates with colleagues who are wonderful and super smart, and they have very different views. So be aware of that. I don't think it's the way forward. I doubt that concentrating on the nature of a good humanity will actually solve the problem of both the environment and the digital technology we are building. I'd rather concentrate on what we want to build and walk backwards from the kind of stuff that we want to the kind of actions, therefore, we need to have and the kind of agents that are able to implement those actions. This is for full disclosure, so you know where I'm coming from. In the following slides, we're going to concentrate now on how to design this particular system. At this point, let me stop for a moment and summarize a couple of points. From now on, you know that we are adopting a soft ethics approach. A soft ethics approach is a way of not only representing something, but also changing something. It's not just mimetic, but ethics is always also poietic. It tries to change, build, not only analyze and understand what is under our eyes. This mix between mimetic and poietic, moving from hard ethics to soft ethics is like any other ethics, is also mostly poietic, normative, changing the system. How can we change the world? Well, if the world is a transition system, the one that is in front of your eyes, a transition system has those following components. Now, mind that this is, pass me the poor analogy, is the pizza margherita of all pizzas. You can put an enormous amount of toppings on it, but bottom line, you will always have system states, actions, agents, and a transition from one particular state of the system to another. That could be a family, a society, could be a unit in a business model. It could be our life. So this transition system has 3 points of intervention. If we want to do soft ethics and digital ethics, and we want to do that in order to be normative, we can intervene on the agents, the actions, or the system states. Of course, I'm oversimplifying. We can always intervene on all of them. And I told you a little bit more about how ethics has been shifting, so to speak, its focus from agents to actions to system states. At this point, we need to go back to design. I told you a little bit about the system, model, purpose, level abstraction. I promised to go back to that. Time to go back to that. So how do we design a transition system in such a way that we obtain the outcome we want? In this simple elementary example in front of our eyes, moving from S1 to S4. Well, we will have to work a little bit hard for another maybe 10 more minutes and see what it means to design something as opposed to work on innovation, understood as invention and discovery. This tool that I found online, I've been using it for some time, is a peculiar tool. As you can tell, one leg is longer than the other two. The only way of doing that is to have it protruding in front. I have this tool in front of us as an analogy because the tool is innovation. You can innovate in a variety of ways, but you can probably reduce all these ways into you discover something, you invent something, you design something. You discover America, you invent the wheel, you design the iPhone. Whatever it is, these 3 components, discovery, invention, and design, are what we understand in terms of innovation. They are always related. That's why there are 3 legs of the same tool. But any age in human history has seen, or can be simplified enough, to be seen as being led by, in terms of innovation, one of the 3 legs. That's why I know the leading leg here. We speak of the age of discovery. Well, we speak of the age of discovery because, of course, we write history from a European perspective. In an EU or European-centric perspective, we discover the world. Of course, people were there from Australia to America. They didn't need to be discovered. It was our way, a European way, of becoming aware that there was, oh, wow, another world out there. That it wasn't just us. The age of discovery is the age of explorations, etc., etc. Then, of course, we have the age of invention, the Industrial Revolution, etc. Of course, there's plenty of discovery, but what is driving history, so to speak, or the history that we have written afterwards, is the invention, one after the other, of extraordinary technologies. If, forgive me, if there is a label for our age, is certainly not the age of discovery or invention, but is the age of design. My trivial example is usually, and will probably not work in a little while, what you find in any Apple product. Design in California, it doesn't matter where it has been produced, normally China or anywhere else. It is design by or design in that makes the difference. A lot of the innovations we have had, staggering innovations in recent years, have been a matter of redesigning something that was already there. And the iPhone is a classic, but Uber is another classic. Uber doesn't discover or invent anything. It redesigns how we get a lift, by whom, and how we pay for it. Now, whenever you can redesign something or design something new from the past, well, that is a huge push for innovation. What exactly is design? Couldn't resist. No, this is a classic, and as an Italian, I might have a bit of a bias for a certain kind of design. Design can be put together. This covers many things, but also design as a combination of these elements. You build something. The building of something doesn't have to be the building of an artifact in 3D analog. It could be the building of a service, of a digital product, of a way of doing things, but something in the very weak of thing in something, you design a system. Remember, that system is not in the world. There will be a slide in a moment describing that. So you cannot describe that system, you design that system. You want to put it in the world. You have some affordances, things that are out there that enable you, facilitate you to do this and that, and some constraints. It could be a budget, it could be a physical constraint, it could be a social acceptance constraint to solve a particular problem in view of a goal. Now, once you put all these things, the affordances, what's easier and more available, what is more difficult or impossible or doesn't allow you to do this and that, in view of solving a problem for a particular goal, the system that you build is put in the world. Step back and then step forward. Now, modernity is dominated by two different logics that, however, don't have design in mind. I'm oversimplifying here again, and I put Kant and Hegel as the two sort of fathers of these two particular logic. People may disagree, but in one case, Kant, he will look at, and let me put the picture next, he will look at a particular structure as the conditions of possibility of a system. Going back to the slide without, Kant will tell you that you analyze a system at a level of abstraction for a particular reason, building a model that identifies the conditions of possibility of that system, meaning that the system is already there. It could be the solar system, it could be our knowledge. But the logic that he develops, so-called transcendental logic, is the logic of conditions of possibility. Of course, it goes hand in hand with cause and effect. So from Kant onwards, you will find that science in particular, when it's interested in understanding why something is out there in the first place, it will look at causal links and therefore at conditions of possibility. It will be doing, in terms of conceptual analysis and conceptual logic, a Kantian analysis of that system. What about Hegel? Well, Hegel is much more interested in not so much why the system is there, but how the system keeps being in a sort of balance there. How come that a system which contains conflicts, tensions, fights, is still able to work and progress? So if you read Hegel from this particular perspective, Hegel is not so much interested in understanding how did it come that we have this society, for example, but more in terms of how is this society developing, moving, transforming itself, and yet still be that society? How does, not why there is a legal system, but how a legal system keeps transforming itself, growing, being elaborated, etc. So it's not so much about here identifying the conditions of possibility. Remember, cause and effect, Kantian, that kind of science, but the conditions of equilibrium for that system. And all the sciences of equilibrium come to mind. Now, the science of equilibria are, for example, economics and jurisprudence. Both in economics and in jurisprudence, we are interested in understanding how come that we can build systems, whatever they are, there, that keep a decent balance between the conflicts, the interest, the different pull and pushes. So a logic of conditions of possibility, transcendental, will be a Kantian logic, and it will go down the road of causality and effect, etc. It is not surprising that when you do philosophy of science, and you do philosophy of science concentrating above all on cause and effect, you have certain kind of sciences in mind, physics, etc., and you look more of a Kantian perspective. But when it comes to Hegel, and therefore Marx and their tradition, you look at different kind of systems, systems where there is a dynamics, a dialectic. The dialectic, the dynamics, is aimed at understanding and shaping, insofar as one can, the internal equilibria of that system. Game theory, therefore, forgive me for the overarching synthesis is an Hegelian discipline. It's a discipline that looks at equilibria and the best equilibria that you can find there. Now, any way of optimizing, etc., systems, trade-offs, and so on, look at the world from a Hegelian perspective. In that sense, it's not surprising that you don't find so much Kant, but so much Hegel in social sciences, political science, economics, anthropology, anything that's got to do with systems, especially socially made, socially built system, where conflicts and the resolution of conflicts is essential. In a way, nature resolves conflicts in such a way, such a long term, that a Hegelian analysis becomes ridiculous. So any way of doing, of applying a dialectic logic to physics sounds ridiculous. But then, so does a Kantian conditions of possibility, cause and effect when it comes to society. Why? Because they've got two different logic. One looks at the condition of possibilities, the structure that belongs to the system. The other one looks at the conditions of equilibrium of that system. So right context, right logic, right kind of modernity. Now, fast forward, and one thing that is missing here is, what if we don't have the system? Remember, modernity, Kant, Hegel, transcendental logic, dialectical logic, conditions of possibilities, conditions of equilibrium. They all assume that the system is there, is already made. They're not design logics, but that's exactly what we need. So move forward, and that's what you get. A design logic analyzes a particular system that doesn't exist at a lower, for example, user interface, generates a particular blueprint. At this point, we have a good word in English, which is not in other languages, so much so that you import that word in other language, say in Italian. This is the actual blueprint of the iPhone 5. You can tell that this iPhone 5 blueprint has a specific level of abstraction. It doesn't look inside, for example. It's the outside, the feel and look, the user perspective adopted here in terms of level of abstraction. It tells you nothing, for example, in terms of internal circuits or battery, etc. Identifies, therefore, a condition of feasibility. It's no longer about something that is out there, how did you get there? Not condition of possibility. Or something that is there, how come that it doesn't explode and it keeps some kind of equilibrium? No, Kant and Hegel. It's a logic about something that is not there yet and you want to build. If you want to build it, you need to look at the conditions of feasibility. Is it doable? What are the constraints? What are the affordances? What kind of problem I'm going to try to solve? And for what reason, what purpose? That design logic is the logic that does not belong so much to modernity. And I still don't have a word for our age, so forgive me. I hate to use postmodern because I think it's just a way of describing something by saying that it's not something else. It's like describing a zebra as a post-horse kind of animal. It doesn't really help because you don't understand what a zebra is yet. But whatever it is that we are living through is not modernity and is not dominated by a logic of the Kantian, the Hegelian kind. Of course, remember, the stool is still there. We still rely on all the legs, the invention, the discovery. Of course, we still rely on a logic of the systems out there, whether in terms of possibility or in terms of equilibrium. But it's not what is driving the extra added value, the thing that qualifies as unique our age compared to modernity. And so anything that smells of design, feasibility, construction, etc., that will definitely be much more our age than the modern age. With that out of the way, we're almost almost reached the time for Q&A. Allow me to push a little bit and require your patience, but the next few slides, 4 more, are very simple. All the hard work for today is done. The next slide is, the next 4 slides are a comment on the logic of design. there is room for optimism. Not much, but there is room. And I want to show you that by using a slightly different approach. This is the original, as you can tell from the alphabet, Anna Karenina. For those of you who have done even a little bit of Greek, you can even decipher Anna Karenina at the top. Anna Karenina has one of the most famous, perhaps I wouldn't say not the most famous, but certainly among the top 10 most famous incipit, beginning of a book. And that is, happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. You find that cited a million times by anyone. Now, there's something weird about that sentence. It's connected with design, trust me. Now, some people think it's a very smart way of talking about success and lack of success. Remember, we want to know whether we can be or cannot be successful in designing the right kind of society, the right kind of rules, whether legal or ethical, for our 21st century. If happy families are all alike, but every unhappy is unhappy in its own way, you might be tempted to develop a principle from this. In fact, actually, if you look at Wikipedia, Jared Diamond, in an essay in 1997 or something like that, in the 90s, called that the AK principle. Now, this AK principle is, forgive me, rubbish. It tells you the following. A deficiency in any one of a number of factors dooms an endeavor to failure. Imagine you are cooking your next pizza. A deficiency in any number of factors in that cooking dooms that pizza to failure. A successful pizza is one where every possible deficiency has been avoided. Does that sound right to you? Not so much. There are many ways of cooking that pizza, and there is room for some kind of, not necessarily failure, but less than optimal solution. Where does this come from? Let's go back. Happy families or alike. There's only one way of being successful as a happy family. Anything else is a disaster. Now, if you start thinking about getting married, that should scare you to death. It would be like saying, as Aristotle did, because this comes from Aristotle, that there's only one way of hitting the bull's eye. Happy family. Only one way. Any other way is an unhappy family, is a disaster, is a pizza you don't want to eat, is a failure of the AK principle. So in terms of design, it is equivalent to saying there's only one way of designing a good society. Only one way of designing ethical AI. Only one way of making sure that ChatGPT works okay. Anything else, a disaster. Obviously, that is terrifying. Once again, remember, only one way of hitting the bull's eye. You put that dart anywhere else, and there are millions of ways of putting it anywhere else, and it will all be wrong. Why is this incorrect? And why the AK principle is not to be adopted? It's just a silly way, a fancy way, a way of sounding intellectual and not reasoning carefully. Well, it is not true that there's only one way of being right. Now, this is the most stupid elementary equation you can imagine, and it has infinitely many solutions. There are infinitely many ways of being correct in solving that solution. If that, for anyone, this is just high school, so I'm sure that you can understand that you can put 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, any number, etc. If that sounds a little bit too scary, think about chairs. How many ways are there to build a proper chair? Well, that is huge. Those are all fine chairs. Of course, they all share one thing. They are such that you can sit on it. They have a back and they don't have arms. Otherwise, it's an armchair. they have to have a back, because otherwise a stool. As you can tell, we need to be precise. But if he has a way of sitting on top of it, and it doesn't even have to have 4 legs. Look at the bottom first, the vintage French has only 3. So in fact, you could have a single 2 plexiglass sort of bits, but it's something you sit on with a back for a single individual. He's on a sofa, he's on a stool, he's on an armchair. And yet, the number of ways of satisfying those constraints, taking advantages of those affordances to solve their problem for a particular purpose, huge. I would dare to say boundless. So back to us. This is just a mistake. It's a mistake to think that you can be happy only one way. It's a mistake to think that life is hitting the bull's eye. It's a mistake in understanding design as something that, in order to put the constraints, the affordances, solve the problem, build a particular system for a purpose successfully, there's only one way of doing that. Of course, there may be different ways of doing that, but actually I would revise the principle this way. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. You can be wrong, build something in the wrong way, in a variety of ways, and it's peculiar to that way. But if you fix that way, it will be happy in no other way comparable to any other. So back to us. It is not true that if we want to build a society, the only way of doing that is to get this diagram right. There's only one way of getting a transition system. That is, we will see this at the end of the course, the limit of any utopian thinking. Utopian thinking is in line with the AK principle, with the bull's eye perspective. If it is utopian, it's perfect. Perfection cannot be perfected. So once you get to perfection, there's only one perfection, and that perfection stays the same forever. So utopian thinking is anti-chronological. It tells you that once you are in that utopian state, you just want to stay in S4, and any move from S4 will be a less than perfect, less than utopian, and therefore should be forbidden. In other words, utopian thinking is intolerant. You cannot move from S4. It's your perfect world. You are in paradise. If you rebel, well, you got punished. Paradise does not allow a variety of paradises. It's only one, it's perfect, you stay there. There is no time when you will get any better way of getting to S4. So design, understood in the terms of the AK principle, only one way of being happy. Remember, imagine if this were something to be found in a religious text. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. We will punish any unhappy family until they get happy the way we told them to be happy. And there's only one way, my way. Now, this is the recipe for intolerance. It's the recipe for bad design. There are many chairs, all fine, all great, and they can be adapted to circumstances, to people, to historical taste, etc. But, however, it is not true that everything counts as a chair. So pluralism without relativism is exactly what we want. We want to move away from only one chair, only one way of being happy, bull's eye, only one way of designing the solution for a society. There's only going to be the communist society and only the fascist, the Chinese way, the American way. That's not what we want to do. But we also want to avoid well, what we discussed yesterday, relativism. Any society has its own ethics, any society can count as a chair whatever they want. It is not true, because it will not respect the constraints, the affordances, the feasibility, the design, building the system, etc., that we saw during the design stage. So there is a middle ground, and for that middle ground to work well, we need to do much more in terms of analysis, but that is going to be tomorrow. Because now we have time a little bit for some Q&A. And thank you, because I know that we're putting a lot on the plate. I hope it was clear enough, but happy to hear from you and answer some questions. I stop now the projection and we go back to the Q&A. Now you should be seeing me as opposed to all the slides.
Yes, we do. Raise your hand if you have questions.
Also questions about yesterday, if you wish.
Okay, we have Rafael.
Professor, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for explanation. Taking a little bit from yesterday and today. Today, of course, there are many complexities to be developed. My question is about the ascribing meaning of reality in the AI ethics. The way, how can we, like a meta-ethics, how can we verify the ascribing meaning of the soft ethics on things are correct in that sense?
Tell me more, because I'm not sure I understood the question. Tell me more.
I'm thinking about when we get into new softwares and programs, when we need to understand how to deal with them. Let's say the new ChatGPT, the LLM progress, we haven't like models right away how to deal with them in the framework of the legal way. So Europe is working on that, on the database, they get it. So as an ethical approach, we need to develop a soft ethics on how ChatGPT will bring benefits to our society. So how can we evaluate that the benefits of ChatGPT in the soft ethics way could be helping us as a society?
Okay, I think I understand. So if you remember one of the slides where I showed the how we can concentrate either on the agents, on the actions, or on the system state, depending on, and that it really is a debate that one has to have. I mean, there is no way of bypassing the debate. You will find not in the way I'm describing it here, because I'm describing it not philosophically in an abstract way, but you will find that the debate on how to say, design the right way ChatGPT or any large language model, it takes one of these three approaches. A lot of the people, for example, will say, look, what we need to do is to educate the engineers. We need to make sure that the companies have principles and they follow those principles, and then we accept those principles, for example, the OECD principles. So one could say, look, the solution to, and I'm oversimplifying, the solution to design or redesign a more ethically acceptable ChatGPT is to talk to OpenAI, the engineers there, the CEO, and make sure that one, they adopt some shareable, acceptable, as universal as possible ethical principles, OECD, for example, and two, they have for example, an advisory board. They have classes to train their engineers in ethical thinking, etc. This will be, in our own sort of terminology that I share with you today, concentrating on the agents. You could, at the same time, alternatively, concentrate on the actions and say, you know what, forget about OpenAI. Whatever the engineers do, whatever the CEO does, maybe they sell it to another company, maybe there's a bunch of shareholders, who knows? I mean, that's not the real focus. What we need to put pressure on are the actions and how you regulate the actions. For example, one could say, look, it really doesn't matter. We have regulations. We need to have, at the same time, a legal normative framework that shapes the actions of that company, and a soft ethics framework that equally helps to shape the actions of their company. That's what we need. We need to concentrate on, is the behavior, if you like, of OpenAI the right thing that we want to have? Alternatively, you could also look just at the effect on the receivers of those actions and say, you know what, it doesn't matter what the CEO, the stakeholder, the shareholder, or what actions this company is taking. What it matters is it something good for society? Is it helping society to improve? Is it adding to the well-being and welfare of the environment and society? For example, we could concentrate on the climate change impact, the consumption of energy, and say, look, whatever you want to do as agents, whatever actions you're going to take, you can't consume all that amount of energy just to improve slightly the search of an engine and, I don't know, provide better recommendations for my next movie. I mean, this is a disaster. I mean, the environment is suffering from this. Now, an environmental perspective here would provide you with a sense of, okay, so it wasn't about principle, it's more about this third point of pressure where we can exercise a normative analysis. Now, normally what we do in society is we use all the weapons at our disposal. We use all three and say, no, educate the company, provide the company with whatever self-regulation, provide good legislation, build a social expectations, social pressure, etc., and make sure that the environment, his voice is heard. That, for example, digital divide, who's going to use these devices? Once you have this picture in mind, the question becomes, which we will discuss later in terms of trade-off, is how, at a meta level, you put some balance between the pressure on the agents, the pressure on the actions, the pressure coming from the states of the system you want to achieve. That is where the fine-tuning happens. And when different cultures decide to adopt a very unilateral or skewed way of doing things, then you find a lack of collaboration, understanding, communication, sometimes even conflict. Take the easy case, and then I stop here, between US and EU in terms of privacy. That's super classic. Well, privacy for the EU is fundamentally a human right, human dignity kind of feature. It's more like system oriented, is you cannot touch that, okay? For a more American and oversimplifying and sketching perspective, privacy is equally important, but it's not about the untouchable nature of the entity out there, system state, but it's about the actions and what is good or bad in terms of privacy for those actions to be more or less successful. If you like, is more in terms of what prompts, what generates better or worse actions, in terms also of transitions and transactions. If we focus too much on the two, well, the two cultures will not talk to each other. You raise the level of analysis, start thinking, look, we really talk about three variables here. They all need to be fine-tuned at the same time. And finally, you have one, understanding of each other, two, space for agreement. As long as we don't understand conceptually at what level we need to find the trade-off and the agreement between different positions, we're just talking, we just bypass each other. Excuse me. And this is just between two cultures quite similar, who have pretty much similar goals and similar backgrounds. Let alone when we're talking about cultures that are very different, opposite goals, etc., etc. At that point, agreement becomes almost impossible. So, sorry, this was a very long answer to your very important question. The recommendation would be, have you identified at what level are we discussing? Or are you still trying to understand that privacy, market-oriented privacy, human rights-oriented are incompatible? Unless you will escalate to a little bit more abstract and therefore more feasible, then we cannot go back into the dialogue and say, oh, now I understand. It's actually a three variables game, and you stressing the third, I'm stressing the second. We can even talk about the first, and there is a way of squaring all then and fine-tune the system. At that point, we have now, in this particular case, for example, transatlantic understanding. Am I optimistic about this? No. Let's get one more question.
Thank you.
We have the one from Boris, the last one I think we can take.
Okay, let's take Boris, and then we close for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very inspiring lecture. My question is that a lot of time the systems we are designing are dynamic. For instance, in economy, So that means that we might agree on the leverage, the levers that we can set, but we don't know the outcomes, and we are also not able to do basically experiments because the outcome of the experiments are too impactful.
We lost you.
Can you hear me? Did you hear my question?
Boris, we lost you for a moment. So say it again. No, system dynamic. We don't know about the outcome, and then.
Yes. So it's just but basically we cannot experiment because, for instance, with an economy, if we dial on the knobs too much one way or the other, we don't know what the consequence will be, and the consequence could be dire for a lot of people.
Dire for a lot of people. We lost you there.
Yes. Yeah, so when you're dialing on the knob, so you have a system, you want to design it, but some systems, we only have one system. So we cannot experiment, too much with the system because we only have one, or.
Correct. What's the question?
So the question would be, how could you model that, or how would you, how would that fit into the model? Because the underlying assumption here, of course, is that you can figure out what the best way forward is. Okay.
No, I got your point. Thank you. Crucial point. Thank you. Like the previous question, all very good. So here. It's not that I have three answers, but there are 3 points that build an answer. First of all, you're right. A lot of the systems we deal with are, as we will see in one of the future lectures, increasingly complex, technically speaking. More to be said about this, but not today. And therefore, fine-tuning those systems is a very delicate operation. How do we cope with that? Well, there are at least shall we say, 2 ways, oversimplifying, there may be more. One is, forgive me, very carefully. When people say, oh, we need to legislate, no, you must have seen these letters going around, no, especially Altman, etc., Elon Musk, the hypocritical approach is staggering. But say, oh, you need to legislate about this. Of course we need. But precisely because what you said, we need to be extremely careful. That's why legislation takes years to develop. You don't pass like the GDPR or the AI Act within a week or a month or a year. I think I go by memory, and maybe Claudio can correct me, but I think the GDPR took 7 years of in the making to make sure that once in place, didn't make a complete mess of that fine-tuning that you refer to. Because you are intervening, you're putting, now remember, putting your pressure on a piece of the system, and the system is incredibly delicate. At the same time, systems are also resilient. So sometimes you can afford some tentative, more or less daring operations. See what is happening in the United States with the fight against inflation. The raising of interest rates was done by the federal carefully, progressively, informatively, constantly saying, we're going to do it. Steady as you are. We're going to do this. Again, 0.25, 0.25, 0.5, and slowly getting to a mechanism where constantly, and you must have seen the markets going up and down and worried and losing a lot and gaining a lot, because of course, depending on the impact of that tiny raise in interest rates, the American economy could actually stop and go into a recession, or could still overheat. So once again, a typical case of policy carefully handle, to make sure that exactly what you said, a dynamic, unique system is not completely screwed, etc. But look at what happened in Turkey in terms of inflation. There is a way of not doing things. Top down, fiat saying, I don't believe in inflation. Boom, now the economy is on its knees. And that is the wrong way of handling a sophisticated, delicate, up to a certain point resilient, but not too much, mechanism. So that's the first thing I want to comment. You're right, and that's why policy is increasingly a very sophisticated tool we need to understand way better. And by the way, for anyone who wants to do research here, a footnote, there's so little philosophy or policy, you wouldn't believe it. I mean, first of all, political philosophy is a minor sort of subject, and it should be a major one. But within that subject, there is very little of philosophical analysis of policy as such, not just the pragmatic stuff. So there's a future career there for anyone who wants to invest. But back to us. I said two, because the other one is something that we can increasingly do these days, which is simulation. And we are at the beginning of that world. We don't have, despite all the amazing amount of data we have and the amazing computational power we have, we don't have enough to simulate even the simplest of economic systems or society. But computational power is growing, and so is the amount and quality of the data we have. At some point, and I'm not sure I will see it, but let's say, fingers crossed, I live another 50 years, most likely than not, policy, the kind of careful policy that I told you about with a couple of examples, will increasingly rely on simulation. Things like, let's see in the simulated system what happens if instead of 2.5 we go 3, or what happens if instead of raising the interest rates in the American economy, blah, 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 in January, we do that in February. We delay by 4 weeks. And more, we will be enabled by that kind of simulation through the data, the computational power, and AI to do this carefully and successfully. The breakthrough, should it ever happen, will be quantum computing. And I close here. When people talk about quantum computing, I think that there are lots of reasons for being excited. No, trust me, since I was a graduate student, I heard that quantum computing was coming tomorrow. That tomorrow is always tomorrow. Remember, tomorrow is an indexical. It's always the day after the day you're actually saying tomorrow. And so tomorrow is is the future of quantum computing, and has been for the past, I don't know, 30, 40 years, whatever. But let's assume for a moment that we might actually develop quantum computing that is not the way we have today. Remember that today we have quantum computing which has problems developed to make sure that it can be solved by quantum computing. And then we can test and try and run a lot of experiments. We don't have quantum computing that solves problems that we are interested in. Now, as long as we have to adapt the problems or build problems, special problems, to make sure that we can test quantum computing, we're not there yet. But let's assume for a moment that we do have quantum computing, then the jump in computational power in terms of speed will be staggering. At that point, the real impact of quantum computing will be on simulation. People will be able to see the future and will be able to provide models for extraordinary changes and what-if scenario. Foresight analysis will become a much more computational thing than just going around asking with a Delphi system, what do you think and what do you think? So, final comment, since you asked this important question, the future of quantum computing, as far as I can tell it, if it ever happens, and I don't know, it may, will be, especially at the beginning, the power to predict the future just a fraction before it actually happens. And trust me, if I could do that with a stock exchange, I would be a billionaire. And people who will handle quantum computing that way will dominate for some time until the other ones catch up, the rest of the world, and simulation for the kind of problems that you actually mentioned. The fragility, the delicacy, the complexity of systems that we better change in silico through a simulation rather than try in real life. Precisely because if you get it wrong, the damage of getting it wrong could be huge and sometimes irreversible. So back to us. Thank you for that super rich question, both of them. I don't know if we can have time for one more, maybe William, but we're running out of time. I'm looking at the director there, Claudio.
We have another one by William. We can take it if it is quite concise answer.
Okay. Okay, William. So your question short, and I try to be short, and then we meet again tomorrow.
Yes, of course. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much for the lectures. And this is sort of jumping off of the point you were making about constructing systems and simulations, and this idea of poiesis and constructionist knowledge. So I was wondering, in designing a system, do we have to sort of, and the shift towards poiesis, does this indicate sort of new epistemic and ethical virtues that are associated with sort of recognizing that these acts of poiesis and designing a system have to sort of come from a patient-centered ecological approach? I don't know if you've got a short answer or if it makes sense, but yeah.
But I failed to capture the question.
Yes. So do you think there's new ethical and epistemic virtues required to exercise poiesis well, whether this is in designing a system like the transition system that we're talking about as an ethical towards an ethical society, or whether it's designing sort of other technologies and things like that, do these virtues, how do they sort of account for a patient-centered approach to the infosphere? Yeah.
So in my view, it would be preferable to focus on the values driving the design rather than on the virtues driving the designer. Of course, the two things are not incompatible, but I'm concerned that by concentrating too much on the virtues of the designer, we might be missing too much in terms of the values that qualify the particular design in place, and therefore the design of the system and the impact of that design of the system on anything else. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that a virtue ethics approach to design by concentrating on the agents is wrong. I think it's not very satisfactory, it's insufficient, because it leaves out or makes it less prominent. It doesn't emphasize enough how much those virtues may not be related to the positive effects on the receiver of the actions and the actual values of the system built. I mean, paradoxically, you could have the most virtuous agent building the wrong kind of systems with the wrong kind of effects. You just need to have someone, say, a bit naive, or someone working with virtues that we might disagree about, but they are satisfactory for that individual. So it becomes a little bit less easy to disregard others and the environment if we concentrate on the values formatting the system built and the values of the receivers of that design. But it's not incompatible, and it's not something that I would criticize. So to be more constructive, I think it's complementary. So in the agent, action, and receiver of the action, if we concentrate only on the agent and how virtuous the agent is, I mean, first of all, you're in very good company. Greek and Christian philosophy is all about the agent, so that's perfectly fine, super classic. Second, it's perfectly compatible with other approaches, and it might be complementary. My only, or if you like, my reluctance to go down that road is that we might be running the risk of ignoring the call from the receiver, so quote-unquote receiver as impatient of not the agent but the patient of the action, nothing to do with medical ethics, just the receiver of the action. And we might be missing opportunities to do differently and better in designing the system that is in the middle. The outcome, the action, the system, whatever you want to call, that is between the agent and the patient. So it is at least worth exploring the other two alternatives. But as I said in reply to one of the questions before, probably the best thing to do is to make sure that we keep in mind all these 3 points of intervention: the agent, the actions, the system, and understand how we can fine-tune them all together. But nothing wrong with a virtue ethics approach to the design of technology, say. I just don't find it particularly in line with expectations and risk management. That's all. That's all there is. But thank you. That was another important clarification, and hopefully all this will become, fingers crossed, increasingly clear as we move through the next lectures. Tomorrow, just anticipating, we will finish this lecture, and if there is time, as I hope, and there should be, we will start, because there isn't much left, it's just a little bit of extra in terms of methodology. We will start the next lecture right away. So there will be a little bit of shifting in terms of slides, but bear with me. Once again, thank you for your patience, and hopefully tomorrow will be the last one that I will not be giving in Bologna, but fingers crossed, because the passport has not arrived yet. So hopefully more in presence, but otherwise more online. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.